Fans, we're back. A lot of big stuff going on in football. Probably one of the biggest news stories in football today actually is the death of Al Davis, the longtime Raider owner.
No, he
Just win, baby.
he was a great owner and a very good coach back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, and then he kind of descended into insanity, many people thought. And he wouldn't allow his coaches really to run the teams. He tried to run it from the general manager's office or from the owner's office. And he did a lot in football, got a lot accomplished. He was one of the big people behind getting the AFL to compete with the NFL, to the extent that they finally ended up merging. And he was against the merger, but because he thought the AFL would be frankly better than the NFL. But he started advancing the AFL to the level that it got to allow the merger to happen and form the modern NFL. And his Oakland teams, like I say, in the 70s, you know, he coached him in a Super Bowl, the Super Bowl II, I believe he coached him, maybe even lost to Green Bay. In Green Bay's back-to-back championship years. I think it was Super Bowl. It was one or two. And then he let John Madden take over as coach, and you know, you had the Raiders win 2 Super Bowls, and I think 75 and 80, and then another one in 82 after they moved to LA. So there's another big thing he did was move to LA. Nobody thought that you were really allowed to move your sports franchises. And that sparked off a bunch of sports franchises moving, him to LA, Baltimore to Indianapolis.
Of course, eventually Houston to Tennessee.
And Cleveland to Baltimore. But he was an innovator, went a little crazy, I guess, towards the end. Did a whole lot for football, though, in the modern football game. He would take a lot of players from his Raiders team that were cast off from other places. They thought they had attitude problems. He sort of celebrated their attitude problems.
John Bradshaw Layfield tells a story on his Facebook page about Al Davis. Said it was they were somewhere, it's Super Bowl week. Said him and the offensive line were just down in the pool. Said all of a sudden Al Davis came down with just cases of beer for them. He was not afraid to interact with the team.
Big name in football history. He's in the Hall of Fame. Deserves to be. You know, and honestly, I would say, you know, Raider fans are in mourning, but they probably aren't terribly upset about it, and maybe think they can get back to actually winning now that he probably maybe did a little less meddling, or there's a little less meddling to do from the ownership spot now for the Raiders.
Of course, big stories today. It's college football. It's Saturday. Steve Spurrier continued his ownership of the state of Kentucky today.
And did he ever? We watched it up until halftime at your house, and it was a one-sided game.
It was 21-3 at halftime, and Kentucky ended up South Carolina ended up winning 56-3.
Yeah.
But you know, he benched Garcia and started a new quarterback.
Yeah.
Because their offense has been struggling terribly. You know, people have been talking about Georgia's defense shutting down all these people this season. Actually, got to looking behind the numbers. South Carolina scored 45 points against Georgia, but there were like 4 defensive touchdowns in it. You know, Garcia was only completed about 50% of his passes and got benched. Then they played Ole Miss and gave up like a touchdown to Ole Miss, or maybe shut Ole Miss out on defense. I can't remember. It's something like that. But Ole Miss's offense is terrible and hadn't scored touchdowns all year. They benched their quarterback before the game last week. So that's 2 quarterbacks Georgia had played this year that have been benched for playing terrible. They beat Coastal Carolina, who's a terrible 1AA team. And then they beat Mississippi State last week. Mississippi State was down 3-0 at halftime. UAB.
I'm saying, speaking of Mississippi State, thank you for embarrassing the SEC today, guys.
Well, they won 21-3, but still they were down. And UAB is awful.
I would say they beat maybe the 5th or 6th best football team in the state of Alabama today.
I mean, you know, still Georgia's not played any good offenses. We'll see what happens today. This will be by far the best offense they've played since they played Boise State in week 1 of the season. And frankly, Boise State's quarterback completed about 85% of his passes for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against Georgia.
He can play, and you know it's
going to be a tough. Georgia. Philip Fulmer pretty much coaches Georgia. He's just skinny Fulmer. Is Mark Richt. You know, he won enough where Georgia has a hard time replacing him because they spent the last 10 years or whatever since between him and Dooley having coaches that struggled. And he gets really good recruiting classes. They're always ranked in the top 10 in the country. But Georgia, frankly, is not very good. I mean, Georgia's out of the SEC most of the time by mid-season. And, you know, they've not won the SEC championship in 5 or 6 years, 7 years, or whatever. It's just like, it's really like Tennessee under Fulmer. You recruit well, you do everything what it seems to be well, but then on game day, you still get beat. A lot more than you ever should.
Of course, another big SEC game today is LSU in Florida.
That one was probably a little bigger before last week.
That's not me.
Obviously.
Luke's being held by someone.
Possibly Twitter.
Possibly.
But before last week, you know, Florida's quarterback got knocked out against Alabama, and they're starting a true freshman who's never started before this week. And LSU was ahead 14-0 in the first quarter when he came out here to shoot. And Florida had 5 yards passing in the first quarter.
I'm by no means an LSU fan, but man, I want to see Florida get pounded.
I do too. I mean, I figure it this way. I mean, LSU has got a really good defense, but they have Chavis as their defensive coordinator and can't really stop any decent passing team. So that just means Florida must be in terrible shape trying to pass the ball with this freshman quarterback. I mean, I would try it anyway. And West Virginia's not really known as passing. They had 400-something yards passing on LSU. I mean, they got beat pretty badly, but as long as you got third and Chavis out there on defense, and you can throw the ball, that's why I think Tennessee's got a decent shot. As long as you can throw the ball against LSU and the Chavis defense, and you'll be able to throw it all day long because LSU's pass defense is not going to be that good.
You know, I mentioned there are sports besides football going on this time of year.
Baffling.
I know, because I don't, you know, I'm not counting baseball because baseball playoffs are, you know,
Baseball?
but
Volleyball.
yes, hockey preseason has started, and Jaromir Jagr is back on the court, rink.
Nice.
Yes, legendary player, great scorer, and as a hockey fan, I'm kind of excited to watch him play.
You know, it's extremely odd because hockey seems like it's a rough sport, but players play till they're 45 or 50 years old.
Gordie Howe was taking shifts with minor league teams when he was in his late 60s.
I mean, I don't understand that. I mean, you can't play past 35 unless you're a quarterback or a kicker in football because you're just beat to pieces. But apparently hockey, I don't know, I guess when you're on ice and
It preserves you.
it doesn't hurt that bad.
Of course, on the hockey side of things, fans, if you get a chance this year, take it an Ice Bears game or 10. They're a lot of fun.
Ice Bear games are just, it's a good night. Tickets really, honestly, for most games are not that expensive. It's a good evening out.
They race winter dogs once a year.
Bring a cushion with you though.
Yes.
Because those seats in the Civic Coliseum.
The Civic Coliseum are pretty terrible seats.
It's like 1948, they put those in there and they've been in there ever since then.
Somehow getting less comfortable, progressive through the years.
I think the wood hardens more.
Right.
But hockey's exciting live. I know everybody's probably asleep right now thinking, you know, I'm not going to watch hockey on TV. Go watch a live game.
Yeah, it's so much better in the arena.
Though I was confused that one time we went to one and they had 7 ceremonial drops. I don't know how that worked.
Yeah. It's a hockey thing, man. I can't explain it either.
Okay.
I figured you would know.
What?
Hockey fan?
Yeah. Be careful.
North of the border.
No.
Back on college football, the big disappointment of the year, sorry, brought Florida State. You know, Florida State's picked in the preseason top 5. Today they lost their 3rd game in a row this week to Wake Forest.
I didn't know they still played football at Wake Forest.
And Wake Forest is 4-1 now. They're not terrible, but they're a small private school about the equivalent of Vanderbilt. 5,000 students. They should not be competing with Florida State in any circumstances. You know, Florida State has year after year of top 5 recruiting classes, and since Bowden got old, really not much to show for it in the men's department. And, you know, Bowden's gone now, and you thought Fisher may do better. I don't think Fisher's going to last very long with the way it's going now. You know, this is, you know, I honestly thought Florida State being in the ACC would be a dark horse, you know, starting in a good position to win the national championship. And that turns out Clemson's going to win it probably. They're probably going to win the ACC. I mean, with Florida State down, Miami not playing well, and Clemson already beating Virginia Tech, I don't see a whole lot left in the ACC for them to worry that much about, which I think Clemson already beat Florida State too, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. So Miami's really their only obstacle. And
Georgia Tech is pretty good. So, Georgia Tech and Clemson look like the best of the ACC right now.
Also in college football today was the Red River rivalry.
Yeah, it's pretty much turned out to what it's been the last, since the year Texas won the national championship 4 years in a row. It's Oklahoma is going to kick you down the stairs and call you names.
I hope your evil Uncle Bud comes and saves you.
I don't think evil Uncle Bud comes to save anybody. He just chases you around in his underwear. But 56-17 was the final score in Texas. You know, they've been down. They look like they may be back this year. People love to rank Texas high, so every time they won a game, they'd move up 6 spots every week, no matter what anybody else did. They were all the way up to 11th in the country after starting out unranked. And they played a decent team today and got steamrolled.
But you know what? Texas still has their own network, so
Yeah, you better watch the replay on the Longhorn Network.
they're making money, and that's what counts.
Oklahoma, a lot of people say, well, gosh, you got to rank Oklahoma number one. No. Here's why I would never rank Oklahoma number one. They do not beat good teams that aren't in the Big 12. They don't. They've lost 5 or maybe 6 BCS bowls in a row, been dominated by SEC teams, beaten by Boise State. They just, once they step outside of the Big 12 and play really good teams, they lose. So, you know, I wouldn't rank them any higher than that until they beat someone from out of the Big 12.
Or as opposed to LSU, you know, they pretty much had their way with Oregon State.
Oregon.
Whatever, same school.
Slightly different. One's orange and one's green.
Both are terrible uniforms.
But,
True.
I mean, LSU went to West Virginia and beat them up badly. West Virginia's in the top 25, and they dominated the top 5 Oregon team too. Beat them at the first game of the season, also away from home, and I think it was in Texas Stadium. But, you know, I wouldn't rank, I mean, the pollsters love Oklahoma for some reason and had them ranked number 1 to start out the year. I'm not sure why.
JR. He gave them all barbecue sauce.
It may be that, I don't know.
And mustard. He makes his own mustard. From what I understand.
Until Oklahoma shows me that they can actually, they beat Florida State in what looked like a big game this year, but
Turns out not.
Florida State's not really good.
Another interesting college football off the field note, the SEC rejected Missouri.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm not really sure I understand that one. I figured they would take Missouri in. Well, I understand that Alabama voted against it, Tennessee voted against it, and some others, because Alabama and Tennessee specifically said they didn't want to lose their game against each other every year.
So it's basically going to have to be a team east if you're in the Eastern Conference.
Auburn wanted it to happen and wanted to move over to the Eastern Division, and that make Alabama their out of division game every year. Alabama said no, we want to play Tennessee every year. And now it's probably going to be West Virginia. I don't really see how they fit into the SEC very well.
No, not in any standard.
Honestly, West Virginia is about 30 minutes from Pittsburgh. I don't really think of being close to Pittsburgh as being a Southeastern Conference team. I mean, Missouri, at least you can say this, Missouri borders 3 SEC states. They border Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. So there would be some natural border rivalries there. And they got really, really good academic program and everything. A lot of people emphasize that.
They've not got a bad football culture, Missouri either. I mean, it's
football, pretty good basketball. West Virginia's got pretty good football and pretty good basketball in the Big East for football. Basketball's going to be good no matter what. I don't know about any other West Virginia sports, but
They feud well.
West Virginia, they got a kind of a small stadium and they're more of a northern city type atmosphere. We'll see. I don't know. I would rather, if they're going to get someone in the East, I would hope they get somebody from the ACC. I would rather it be a North Carolina State, because North Carolina's got a lot of big market potential. It's one of the more populous states in the Southeast. I think third behind Georgia and Florida. Or maybe it actually, yeah, I think it's third. It's got 8 million people in North Carolina. Good recruits in North Carolina.
They play pretty good football in North Carolina. They play pretty good football in the high school level in North Carolina.
And North Carolina State actually takes football pretty seriously. They're not really all that good at it, but you know, that's pretty.
But they care. I mean,
you know, frankly, South Carolina was terrible at football before they come to the SEC too. And it took them a while. It took them 15 or 16 years, but they finally got to where they could compete in the SEC. But we'll see what happens. You know, A&M is for sure in. I can't imagine they're going to play with 13. I don't know how the schedule would work next year if they try to play 7 teams in one division, 6 in the other.
Yeah, I was reading an article about which one is it that has 13? One of the major conferences has 13.
I don't think any major conference.
Or one of the D1
West or
conferences
somebody
has
like
it.
that had 13.
Yeah, and it's terrible. how
Conference
it's
USA,
played.
one of the two.
I mean, it's absolutely terrible how the schedule works.
But I don't see how you can have your championship game and in any way make it fair if you try to play, you know, a schedule like that. I'm not sure how it would work.
I honestly think starting out, they probably would not give Texas A&M a set rival, and just
That's possible.
that's the only way I see it.
We'll see what happens between now and the next few months. If it doesn't happen in the next few months, it will be at least a year or two before another team comes in. But they'll play it that way, you know. Heck, as long as it doesn't affect Tennessee, I'll be fine with it. I think it'd be strange going. As it is now, when the teams get that big, instead of 16 teams, I'm hoping they go to a 14 pod system. Because if they try to keep 2 divisions at that point,
He's going to play no out of conference.
well, I mean, even if you add a conference game and only play 3 out of conference games, it'll be like you'll play Texas A&M, for instance, once every 10 or so years. And that wouldn't be any fun. What would be the point in having them in there if you only play them every 10 years? So I would hope to go to 14 pods if that came to pass. And maybe even make a semifinal game. I guess you have to have a semifinal and then an SEC championship game. You know, drop one of those 1AA opponents. Everybody seems to want to play every year to get an extra home game.
Well, fans, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode of Sports Chat. We'll be right back with some wrestle talk, and we'll see you on Sports Chat next week. All of you come to Powell Friday night. So I was